Test. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Max, can you hear me? All right. I think that's working. Oh, good. I think we're good. Yeah. All right. Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay. I'm going to take myself off and put up the slide. Welcome to the Dr. DigiPol Show. I am Alan Rosenblatt, aka Dr. DigiPol, and we are back for another week of talking about digital politics, talking about public relations, talking about Donald Trump and social media and all those exciting things that have been happening. And boy, has it been a good week. All I can say is kafefi, because I don't even know why I would say that, but apparently it's the thing to say right now. But we're excited today because we have as our guest Jennifer Farmer. Jennifer is the managing director of communications at PICO. For this show, she is the author of Extraordinary PR on an Ordinary Budget. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's good to see you.
Nice seeing you as well, and thanks for having me on.
I'm very happy to be on, have you on the show, and I'm also really looking forward to your book event at Politics and Prose. Was it next week?
No, so the book launches on Father's Day, June 18th at 5 p.m. It's Politics and Prose on Connecticut Avenue. So that's the larger Politics and Prose bookstore location.
Great. So if you are in DC, definitely go, because it'll be an opportunity to get some insights and interaction with Jennifer. But of course, if you're watching me now on Facebook, I suggest you jump over to the Shindig platform so you can ask questions as we talk here. But let's start out with the basic premise. Extraordinary PR on an ordinary budget. Sounds like you've had some experience working with limited resources.
Absolutely. And let me just show a cover of the book. So this is what the book cover looks like. And the backstory for Extraordinary PR, Ordinary Budget is I've spent the bulk of my career working on social justice and racial justice campaigns for nonprofit organizations, for political entities. And one thing that I found is that oftentimes you never have enough resources to get your message across. The other thing that I've found is there are a number of grassroots organizations who are spearheading important work, but they don't have the resources to really elevate and highlight that work in the court of public opinion. So what I do in Extraordinary PR is to look at case studies from a number of campaigns that I've worked on. And one thing that I've discovered is that there are ways to elevate your work even when your budget is limited. And so in the book, I introduce a framework, and the framework is CCRR, and it stands for being credible, being creative, being relentless, and being responsive as a strategy to generate press, especially when your budget is limited, but it also works for organizations that have larger resources to work with as it relates to PR.
So give us an example of a situation where you had to be quickly responsive and creative and didn't have a lot of resources to work with, and how did that play out?
Sure. So one memorable example that comes to mind is for several years when I worked for Advancement Project, I worked with a grassroots organization in Virginia, Northern Virginia, called Tenants and Workers United. And Tenants and Workers United has been spearheading a campaign in Alexandria schools to really look at how children of color are disciplined and the racial disparities that occur between children of color and their counterparts. And when I say children of color, I'm referring to African American children, Latino children, Asian children. And the studies show that a lot of times in school districts across the country, children of color are disciplined more harshly, more frequently for the same infractions as their white students. So Tenants and Workers United was spearheading a campaign, and they really wanted to generate media attention for an event they were having. At the time, I was short-staffed, and I was thinking, okay, well, what's the best way to really let the community know what they were doing? And so I organized what I called a pitch-a-thon. And the pitch-a-thon what I did for that was I went over to meet with the young people, and I did a media training with the young people. And I thought, how interesting would it be for a reporter to hear from not just me, but also young people who are directly impacted by the issue that I'm talking about. So I wanted the young people themselves to pitch reporters. And what I did, like I said, is I did a media training with the young people for maybe 90 minutes. And then after the media training, I put them on the phone and I had them call reporters one-on-one and invite them to come to an event and really outline for the reporters in their own words what was happening at their high school. And the high school is T.C. Williams High School. And it proved incredibly effective. I remember getting David Coles on the line and a young person pitching him. And he was really impressed by the fact that this young person was able to communicate what was going on in the school, the changes they wanted to see, and the solutions they had in mind pretty quickly. And so that's an example of being creative. It's an example of, of getting your message across, but not using a lot of resources. In this case, the resource was really the time that it took for me to train the students, as well as the time that it took for them to call reporters. So that's an example of being creative, and also maximizing the resources that you do have rather than focusing on what you don't.
Right. And it's great the way it really focuses in on the people who are the story actually
Absolutely.
doing the pitching.
Absolutely. And, for reporters, when they're thinking about writing stories, they're looking for elements that are unique. And so I thought, how often does a reporter hear from a 16, 17-year-old, 15-year-old about what's happening in their school? So that was an element that was unique.
Yeah, very much so. What are the elements, when you say that you have short staff, what would be an ideal situation where you don't have an ordinary budget, where you have a dream budget? What would you want to have that you typically don't have in an ordinary budget situation?
So, even if you have a dream budget, you still have to think of creative ways to capture the attention of the media. So if you have a dream budget, then you might have resources for paid media. And by paid media, I mean advertising on the different, media platforms. And so in that case, you can do earned media events as well as paid media. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of organizations, if they do have a paid media budget, the paid media budget scales in comparison to larger organizations. And so, what they're able to do with that, with that money is it's pretty limited. And so you say, what's the ideal budget? Well, it depends on the organization. It depends on the campaign that they're running. And one thing that I should say is, while I talk about strategies to generate media coverage, I'm very clear in the book that there are some things that you really do have to invest in. So for instance, if your organization is facing a PR crisis, a scandal, we've seen a lot of those in the media in the past several months, and the airlines come to mind, as well as Shea Moisture and that kind of thing. If you're facing a crisis that could compromise an organization's brand, that's an area where you really don't want to cut corners, because it has long-term implications for the organization, for credibility, and for standing with consumers. And so I didn't write the book to suggest that, we should be penny pinchers when it comes to generating our message. I wrote the book to ensure a level playing field so that people who don't have the resources really feel like there's a way for them to push their message and to get in front of donors, in front of the public, and push their agenda.
So that means that even a small organization that's limited on staff, limited on budget, can leverage a more effective strategy in order to be very successful without those resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one example is, so there are a number of organizations that, like we said, they have limited budgets, and they're thinking about what we see sometimes is we see organizations that see the value of communications, but they don't have the money to invest in communications. And so you see someone who's wearing several different hats. Maybe the person has communications functions in their role. Maybe they're doing operations. Maybe they're doing development. That's entirely too much. And so part of what I'm trying to do is also make the case that, communications is important and you should invest in it, rather than, segmenting and having the communications person do several different jobs. And so the book offers tips for communicators who are just starting out. It offers tips for executives who are making decisions about how to allocate resources, and how I think there's a direct correlation between your visibility and your ability to then go out and raise money about the work that you're doing.
So one of the is that even if you have a limited or an ordinary budget, it's important to make sure that your communications staff, however many you have, are focused on communications.
Absolutely.
And not distracted on other things.
Absolutely. And so, when I started sharing that, where I was going is, so if you are an organization that has, let's say, 1 or 2 people devoted to communications, and you need more staff, but perhaps you don't have the resources to hire to scale at that point, there are a number of universities, schools of journalism, schools of or public relations departments that will give a student credit if you provide an internship. Now, I'm a proponent of paying students for internships, but that's an avenue that one could pursue. For instance, Harvard University, and Harvard is a little bit unique, but Harvard University has an Institute of Politics, and they have a summer internship. And their summer internship places students all across the world. And about 3 years ago, we had, when I was working for Advancement Project, one of my, a woman on my team graduated from Harvard, I think the year before. She told us about the internship and linked us up with the appropriate person. And then we were able to get an intern for the summer. And this intern, we were responsible for providing the experience, the enrichment, and the learning experience, but Harvard actually paid for the student's time in Washington.
Wow.
And so that was a situation where we got the benefit of having an intern, and we didn't have to pay for it, outright.
Right. And the nice thing is if you're pulling interns from graduate programs, MA programs, for example, or really high end, upper class in good undergraduate programs, you're getting somebody who shows up with a skill set and can do the work, of course, with guidance and supervision, but it's not like you're throwing, a kitten out to the wolves in the job.
So part of this goes back to creativity. The other planks of the book that I discuss are being credible. So once, so in your pursuit to capture media attention, it's really important that you preserve your credibility. And what I mean by that is, even before you begin pitching reporters, you'll want to know whether or not the reporter is the appropriate person for you to engage on a given topic. So I talk about, I give examples on ways to preserve credibility. I talk about response time. So when a reporter reaches out to you, what's the ideal time that should elapse before you follow up? And then what happens if you don't follow up very quickly? So a lot of us know that when a reporter calls you for a story, a lot of times they're calling other people as well, because they want to ensure they have a source. So responding as quickly as possible is one way to ensure that your voice and your perspective is included in the story. The last point that I discuss in the book is the power of being relentless. And relentlessness is pretty key, because a lot of times people in the PR profession face rejection. You're pitching a story, you don't get the response you would hope for. And it can be really easy to internalize that. And one thing that I'm promoting in the book, and I give examples to back this up, is that one thing that can make the difference between you being covered or not is your willingness to persevere in the face of what appears to be rejection, and how that can lead to story placements.
So I want to talk a little bit more about that, because there's a fine line at some point between relentlessness.
Alan, are you still with us?
I am. Are you? You're not hearing me. Can you hear me? I'm going to type you talk about relentlessness.
There's when I say relentlessness, I want to be clear that I'm not talking about being annoying. And in the book, um, I describe the difference between being relentless and being annoying. So, so when I reach a reporter, if they are adamant that they are not interested in covering my story, or perhaps the timing is not right, then I will back off. But before backing off, I will ask the reporter, is there someone else in your shop who you think who I might engage? And then I'll go from there. And let me give you an example. Before the start of the football season, I believe in 2014, we wanted to write, me and my staff, we wanted to write an opinion essay highlighting the mistreatment of Native Americans. And so one of our a beautiful piece, and we felt like the appropriate placement for the piece was the Washington Post. And so I asked a staff member to pitch the opinion essay to the opinion editor, Michael Larrabee, and he quickly declined. And so in this case, relentlessness was going back to ask the reason. And then, when he said no a second time, I asked the staff person to go to a different editor. In this case, it was the city editor for the Washington Post. And after engaging the city editor of the Washington Post, the piece ultimately got published. And so that's an example of being relentless. Had we took no, the first no from Michael Larrabee, that piece never would have saw the light of day. But we went back to him to ask him the reason that he declined. And then we searched for other people at the Washington Post, and we were ultimately successful. The piece was published, within a matter of weeks after we initially reached out to Larrabee, and it was still timely for what we were trying to do.
Well, thank you. This has been really, really helpful. I think I'm having a little technical difficulty here, but are you able to hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Alan?
Excellent. Okay. Well, so I know that your time is because you've got a little one. I can hear you just fine. Yes.
Okay. And what I was saying about relentlessness was that captured? Because I'm happy to repeat that if that's helpful.
Yes, that was fantastic. Thank you. That was spot on. Thank you. I understand that you have limited times, and I just want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time. And so, if you have any final comments before we wrap this up about the book, I'd love to hear them, and then we'll move on to the next segment.
Yeah, so let me just say again that the book launch is on Father's Day, June 18th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time at Politics and Prose Bookstore, Northwest. And really, in addition to doing a talk, I'm going to share some case studies, and then there'll be door prizes. So I would encourage everyone to come out for that. And then there'll be a reception that follows the book signing. And again, here's the here's the book cover.
Great. Well, thank you again for your time. And oh yes, Extraordinary PR, Ordinary Budget by Jennifer Farmer.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. I'll see you at your book signing.
All right. Thanks, Alan. Take care.
Now that we're going to move on now to our next segment, I want to bring up on stage one of our regulars, Ben Barnett. Let's see if he's here. And Benjamin, are you here?
Yes.
I can hear you. Can you hear me, Ben?
Yes, I can.
Welcome back to the show. It's been a while. How's life treating you?
Life's been treating me great. Very exciting life we live. Wonderful day out today too. So
it is indeed. It is indeed. So let's start with perhaps the most intriguing thing that's been happening on in the news on digital politics, and that's the explosion on Twitter with regard to Covfefe. Now, of course, we have serious things going on. The president has just announced that he's pulling us out of the Paris Accords. In response to that, Twitter is exploding with mayors and governors all around the country saying that, well, you may pull the United States out of the treaty, but we're going to move forward to this as if we're part of the treaty. So in a way, we're seeing an example of Trump's failure to lead as he tries to lead. But this Covfefe thing is just, it's driving me nuts, right? All I have is this image of Donald Trump late at night sitting in his bed, maybe, with the phone in his hand, typing, and then he starts to doze off, mistypes, and hits send, and there you have it. And then 6 hours later, he wakes up, realizes what he did, deletes it, and tweets something funny that says, oh, if you can figure out what it means, enjoy. What do you think of that theory?
Well, I think it was Spicer's response of, if the people who needed to know understood what it meant.
Yes.
You could have been riffing off of alternative facts or something on that level. You know how it seems to be working here, but I don't know. I mean, if we want to get really deep into what it actually could have meant, I think it could make for interesting conversation for sure. But I like the idea, and I think the analysis is that he was actually falling asleep and kind of hit the send button by accident. And I would argue that's probably going to happen more than once.
Yeah, I can imagine it.
Already.
Of course, as each year he gets older, right? Well, the other side of thing is President went to Europe, went to the Middle East and Israel, and because they're not necessarily the same thing apparently,
right?
And he keeps coming back on social media talking about how amazing the trip was. Sean Spicer was up in a briefing the other day, and the litany of superlatives about how successful the trip was astounding. And it was so clear that Spicer did not write that statement, that the statement was written by the president and handed to him and said, you will read this. And meanwhile, we've got Merkel out there saying we're going to go our own way, which, in a way, President Trump says that he's supposed, that Germany and Europe are supposed to stand up and do more. And then the response is, well, we can't expect the United States to help us, so we're going to stand up and move forward without them. And that's not quite the message I think Trump thought he was giving.
Really? I think, I think we're talking about a lot of things, obviously, but, in reference to Merkel and her comments, that we're not the leader anymore, I think that Trump is getting what it is he wanted to do, exactly get here. He is looking to back away. He is walking away from, I watched the Paris Accord speech he just, wrapped up, and, It's I feel that this is something that is wanted by his group. I do believe there's a camp inside, perhaps from his daughter and his son-in-law, senior advisors, that maybe were more globalist in their approach. Steve Bannon's obviously, patting people on the back right here. So, I think this could be a sort of whip back to maybe what was the original campaign promises that he seemed to be getting caught off guard with, healthcare, things like this, that he's getting slapped around for, maybe not realizing exactly how Washington works. So it's pretty obvious you can walk back on something like this, these type of accords, these executive orders, which I should also add, the next president can walk away from his executive orders. So, I think it's a bad way to lead, if I may, obviously, but maybe not so obvious to other people. I mean, there's a huge chorus on conservative radio I've been listening to all day that are just, I absolutely see this as a bottom line, walking away from this. Absolutely. And
I've definitely seen a lot of that. I've also seen snippets of people on Twitter saying, and it tend to be sort of independents that didn't want to vote for Hillary, that voted and campaigned for Trump, that are now saying if he walks away from the Paris Accords, that they're going back the other way. That this is I
would argue disaster. That was the bottom line at this moment in his political history. For sure, this was. People like Rush Limbaugh smashing and Hannity, these guys smashing their hands on the table saying this is the bottom line. So I really think he listens to these political talk show wins without fail. And clearly, I think the message was clear. He had to walk away from this, like outright walk away.
Right.
And that's
now, it is interesting because, what you're positing, and I think you're absolutely right that he's sort of sticking to a campaign promise, sticking to his campaign rhetoric. At the same time that he does things like that to sort of nail it down, there's these other things where, he's going on and on during the campaign about the security risks of the email server and things like that. And yet social media has exploded in response to the fact that President Trump has been handing out his personal cell phone number to the heads of states that he's been meeting with. A cell phone which is not secure. Mm-hmm. And it just it's I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, there's all these people talking about how this is such a contradiction to what he was saying during the campaign. And then there are these things like pulling out of the Paris Accord, which is sticking to his guns of what he said during the campaign. What is your sense of who's listening and who's paying attention? Are the people who are applauding his consistency and keeping the promise on the issue of the Paris Accords, are they seeing regard to the security issues?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, possible to realize that maybe people don't think that far, if I may. They haven't gone quite that far, and they're not waiting in line for that next iPhone or tool or something on that level. You're looking at people who we would consider to be more of a working class environment, different perspective, and I think that that's probably one of the most crucial things going on right now, is that Trump has a wide base of support that I think people have forever underestimated from the election up until right now. So I really think that it's important also to note that this administration, in my opinion, is almost running by trial and error. I think the Jared Kushner thing that's going on right now, if every time I dig into this, I just keep seeing incompetence. I see, not knowing, naivety, more ignorance is bliss, not this sort of conspiracy to, mess with the climate, so to speak, but truly believing their actions, truly believing they're above these type of things. Like, why would we be recruited by, top Soviet spies? Why would we be considered? This sort of naivety towards this entire administration, to me, is shocking. And I think that pulling out of these chords. If we could obviously do many shows on the value of the assessment. So and for example, and getting back to the naivety, like they keep bringing up Syria and Nicaragua, and people seem to forget that Nicaragua wouldn't sign it because they thought it wasn't tough enough. And then Syria, I'm not sure who's anybody available right now.
Right.
But, so again, it gets back to leadership, in my opinion, and leading by example. And I think this administration is leading by its own example. And, it's kind of the we know best, if I can bring the whole Hillary Clinton debate into this discussion, of, taking responsibility and thinking you're above the information and the data and the answer and going with it. And then it fails. The process fails. Right. It will fail. People will lose jobs. People think that this is a job thing. Well, it might be. It's certainly not a long-term job prospect, that's for sure. So, again, I think this is about perspective, and I think this administration is flying incredibly naive.
And that creates an opportunity in the way that they're messaging this to feed a narrative to their base that the narrative will accept because of this not looking beyond the more immediate analysis.
That's right. Absolutely right. It's more what's in front of them. There's an immediate needs, a check mentality. And, and that's, I would, say is the majority of citizens in this country, if not the world. So, we have a tendency to think, about this sort of obvious, like you said, a cell phone. I remember when he was in the Mar-a-Lago estate and they're using the flashlights, talking about, missiles in a confrontation with North Korea. To the Japanese ambassador, and here is the guy with the nuclear code, the guy that was this mythological figure to me up until it was like tweeted with a selfie from the dining room in Mar-a-Lago, and this guy's holding it that could destroy the world. Like, I thought that guy was fake until I saw that picture my entire life.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was real, but it was more of a, here he is. Just you would think you'd be behind like bulletproof glass, and no, he's hanging out taking selfies, with Trump. So I think there's this sort of bravado, this bromance world out there. Something's going on that I just don't think that they understand the consequences a lot of times of their actions.
Yeah, I agree. The lack of understanding of the consequences is fascinating. I mean, even DHS, Department of Homeland Security Secretary General Kelly, made some comment about how back channel diplomacy channels are part and parcel and good for the White House. And then but this was done 2 months before he became president, and the whole idea was to set up a back channel that the White House would be ignorant of. That the Obama White House would not be able. I mean, John Brennan made the comment that if a CIA agent did something on this level, it would be considered treasonous espionage. This is a problem. But I like your point about leading by example, and I want to bring up a different issue on social media that happened this past week. The White House Facebook page published 94 pictures from the trip to the Middle East, Israel, and Europe, and interestingly, one picture which had made the rounds in the media it was taken by the official White House photographer, Andrea Hanks, was the picture of all the first ladies, along with Luxembourg's first husband.
Yeah.
Because the Prime Minister of Luxembourg is married to is a man married to another man, and this one, and this picture was really an extraordinary picture because it really elevated this idea of equality of same-sex marriages versus opposite-sex marriages. That they're just marriages, and then the decision, clearly a decision to leave that one picture out of, and obviously I'm sure they left other pictures out, but the fact that this picture, which had made the rounds so broadly on the regular media, was left out of the White House presentation just really speaks volumes, I think, in what it doesn't overtly say.
Yeah, I agree. But again, I would argue that they probably thought nobody would notice it. So I think they left it out with the intent to not, ignite any type of controversy, not give somebody from their base, which obviously a lot of the base comes from that fundamentalist right, give them any ammo for that. So,
Right.
I can also see this president, sort of brushing aside Luxembourg as sort of non-consequential in the world stage in some level, sort of the way the Belgian.
I mean, they're hardly bigger than Montenegro, right?
Right. Exactly. Montenegro.
I mean, that I remember watching that video of Trump pushing the prime minister of Montenegro out of the way in order to get to the front of the line and fix himself up and look good for the camera. And I saw it had 1.7 million views, that video.
Yeah.
And I went to show it to a colleague of mine, and then I went down to sit at my desk again. 5 minutes later, I looked at it. It had 2.5 million views.
Right.
It was extraordinary explosion. Now, as far as some other things that sort of blew up on social media this past week, there were two celebrities that posted photos of themselves that caused some angst. I'm going to start with the less well-known one, and that was Pitbull. Pitbull posted a Memorial Day tweet with a photo of the Stars and Stripes superimposed over his own face. And social media exploded about how this isn't about you. This is about the soldiers that died in the war, in all of our wars, and or died defending freedom. And so I thought that was the other one. And I was a little disappointed when the president spoke at Arlington Memorial Cemetery that he didn't take the opportunity to mention the two guys that died in Portland defending the freedom of the woman who was being harassed by the white supremacists on the train. Right. I know that they were not soldiers, although one of them was a veteran, but they threw their lives on the line and died protecting another person's freedom, and that's exactly what Memorial Day is all about. And I thought that the opportunity to connect this idea that that our soldiers in uniform as well as our people at home are all we're all here protecting freedom, and casualties are sad and unfortunate, and we need to be respectful of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a comment on that. But now let's go to the heavy one, and that's Kathy Griffin. So interestingly, I remember Lou Dobbs tweeted about how horrible it was that she did this because it scarred Barron Trump, an 11-year-old child. And in the process of tweeting this, he reposted the photo. Now, all I can think of in this respect is that during 9/11, when the news kept showing the planes going into the World Trade Center over and over and over again on the news, that there were documented cases of children who were freaking out because they thought the attacks were happening again and again and again and again in the real world. And so the idea that Dobbs would post the picture that he was horrified that was put in front of a child again to his millions of followers, or millions in audience through the ripple effect, just seemed to me, I don't know, just the level of self-serving promotion as opposed to true upset, anger, or criticism. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've followed Lou Dobbs for a long time. I bet you he didn't even think about it. He wanted to show everybody how horrible this photo was. Look at this. This is awful. Look at this awful photo. This liberal left. Look at this. Look at this photo. So he's out there screaming for people to look at the photo. So I just don't believe he knew I don't think he has any idea what you're talking about. No left.
It reminds me of years ago how Jesse Helms was complaining about Playboy centerfolds up to the camera on C-SPAN, holding one up to the camera on C-SPAN, to the point where I kept thinking, he's probably shared more pornography on C-SPAN than any of the people he's complained about.
Ever, right?
Ever,
So,
ever.
Yeah. Look, so it